Dear friends, the time has come to release Invita 2, which is an update on Invita, my submod from 2015 for the mod 1648 30 Years of War. The main motive for that submod was to add portraits to the set of portraits we had, but that had the consequence of it would increase the size of the mod, which was already quite big. And so we decided to do it as a submod, and then I could update it whenever I wanted to, and the time has come to update it after 10 years since its release. But it's not a submod in the sense that it changes things. It is a submod in the sense that it enhances what is already there. So I will explain to you what the submod changes then. So you can download it from moddb. So here's the link, and here's the what to search for, and then I will put the link in the description below the video. There are two parts in the submod. There is one that is just portraits, but the main part is the first part, which is all the other files. And then these are the general files that I will explain shortly. And then in addition to these general files, there is a second part to the submode for those who want to update the portraits. So Invita had 400 portraits, whereas the original mod had 200 portraits for the generals. In fact, the very original version had 123. And then we increased it to 200. And then Invita submod increased that up to 400 and added portraits for merchants, spies, assassins, diplomats, and all the other agents. In addition, it did a few other changes which are kept in this current version, this update. So you don't need to install the original version. This new version has all the old additions to the game. The majority are here. You will see under data, you will see everything here listed out. There are text changes, that's the translations from German into English mainly, and a couple of changes in the names. There were some names that were buggy, so I changed those. And then there are some changes in the UI. These are other than the changes in the portraits. In terms of the changes in the data files, there is a set of changes there present. Some of these files are new. Some, I think only one was old. The majority of them are new. And we'll start with the first one, describe campaign AI DB. That's the campaign AI. And for some reason, Microsoft thinks it's a Microsoft Edge HTML document. It's an XML document. They existed, I'm pretty sure, way before Microsoft started making Windows. And so I don't understand why Microsoft engineers use acronyms for their programs that already existed before. These acronyms, they're very basic, and XML files are very basic files from decades ago. Why do you adopt the acronym for a new set of files? I don't understand it. I remember once, one of the earliest image file formats was one file format called RAW, RAW, and that has existed for like 50 years. I don't know what existed since computers existed. And at some point, Microsoft engineers created one of their file names called RAW. When I brought it out to them that this file name has existed forever in computer science. Oh, it's an insignificant one. It's not as important as ours. It's just, why can't you call it something else? Like instead of RAW, call it RBW or whatever. I mean, you had the option there. So many combinations of letters you can make. Whatever. I don't understand. So this first document is not a Microsoft Edge or whatever file name. It is an XML file. It is one of the files that existed in the game forever. It is giving instructions to the AI how to behave, what to do on the campaign map. Mostly in relation to the human player, but also in relation to the other factions, other AI factions. So its faction follows this when it comes to its turn, it goes through all the steps and makes decisions, and then over to the next faction, and over to the next faction. So it has instructions about what the AI factions should be doing in their change of turn. And we had created this after reviewing every single campaign AI we could get our hands on. We made a synthesis of them, whatever behaved the best, to give pike and shot formations, some sort of realistic looking battle deployment, at the same time making them effective, making them completely realistic turned out to be impossible. So realistically, the shot, the musketeers and the pikemen should be moving together as a unit, and that turned out to be impossible. It was also impossible to portray dragoons as moving on horses but dismounting to fire. So there were certain things like that that were just very difficult to do. I will maybe go into some of the aspects of the AI, the deployment of the units and so on in a separate tutorial. This has only a small change compared to what you will find in the base game. Someone suggested recently that whatever difficulty you play, even on very hard, the AI factions become passive later in the campaign, and they are scared of the human player. And that is true. It is so in all AIs, in all campaigns, whichever one you choose, you find this. Once the human player becomes very strong, the other factions will not attack him. And that was the reason why Creative Assembly introduced, let's say, the Mongol invasion event. So the Mongols were then made to be extremely strong. And they would attack the human players. The human player would then have another challenge to face. Now, we had once some horde events. It was decided to remove them. There's still only one or two. There's a Turkish horde event and a Siebenbürgen horde event, but these are not very powerful hordes, and so there isn't really a challenge for the human player, and that is true. And so then the AI factions become passive after game turn 100 or so, when the human player is very strong, or if the human player has a very strong alliance. At the moment, what I thought of doing was to make the AI factions still prepared to conduct some raids or some opportunistic attacks on outlying settlements that are not very well guarded. For example, the small settlements, the towns. So there may be attacks on those. There will be opportunistic now and then, hit and miss. Do not expect a huge change, but a little bit more aggressiveness in late game than what you would normally see. The AI factions will not declare war against the human player if they are not at war with the human player already in late game. But if they're already at war and the human player refuses to make peace with them, then they may conduct these opportunistic attacks and raids. It's not going to be like all over the place. It's going to be one every couple of game turns. So don't expect some major change. Okay, the next is a describe _names. That has something to do. That was for the original version of the Invita submod. I had changed something in the names. I think some of the names were missing or were buggy or were empty or something. You still see some empty names for some of the pagan priests or rebel, whatever they're called, the heretics. Sometimes they have vacant names, but you will not see vacant names anymore. There used to be some vacant names before, so I think that's what it is there. So that has been changed. There was a bug that was fixed. The describe transition screen, that has something to do with adding new quotes. I have added the Monroe quotes Robert Monroe quotes. As I have said, Robert Monroe was a Scottish soldier who was originally an officer. I think he was originally a captain, or at least he's recorded to have been a captain in one of the companies of the Scottish Regiment under Danish service. Then he was in Stralsund when Stralsund was sold to the Swedes, and then he fought for the Swedes, and eventually joined the Scottish Regiment joined Gustavus Adolphus in his campaign southward into Germany. He fought in the Battle of Breitenfeld and at Alta Vesta, and in Lutzen, where the Scottish Regiment of Foot was very badly mauled, suffered very heavy casualties. And at some point, he returned to Scotland. Many other Scottish generals fought for Gustavus Adolphus. And the leader of the Covenanters during the Covenanter invasion, during the English Civil War, was a former general for Gustavus Adolphus. The Earl of Ruthven, I forget his actual name. Ruthven was some province, was a title made up for him, specifically didn't exist before. Forget what his name was under which was known under Gustavus Adolphus. In any case, and some English generals, by the way, fought with Gustavus Adolphus. In any case, so the transition screens has quotes from Robert Monroe's memoirs. He wrote a very interesting account of his expedition with a regiment of Scots. And so that's that. The ancillaries, expert describe ancillaries, that redefines some of the ancillaries, how they're triggered, essentially. And also redefines their images. So the images, I will explain that very shortly. The images will be now no longer medieval images, but they are from this period, from paintings, from illustrations from this period. These are the thumbnails for the ancillaries. I had to give them names, different names, so I can differentiate between the different ancillaries, because very often the ancillaries had the same, like the architect and the scribe and a couple of other ones. I can't remember, the tutor and this and that. They all had the same thumbnail image, and I wanted to have separate ones for them. So I had to redefine the names, and so that's what that does. No real effect on the campaign. These are all files that change little bits to either fix some bug or just to update or make it more like historically correct, to have like the portraits for the ancillaries from this period. Okay, so expert described buildings. I cannot remember. I remember what this was. There was previously there was a bonus for taxation. It was called like taxation bonus. So several things, for example, tobacco will give you a taxation bonus if you had a resource, a tobacco resource, and you upgraded it, or you built a tobacco resource as a building, as a construction. And that was historically correct. It was researched, indeed. Tobacco was taxed. And so it was decided to give it a taxation bonus. Unfortunately, it was probably already known, but maybe not very well established, but it became established that the taxation bonus actually has no effect. So there is a line, a script line, your taxation bonus, bonus 1, bonus 2, whatever, that actually has no effect. And sometimes some of these resources only gave a taxation bonus. For example, tobacco would not give any other bonus if you built it. So you spent 5,000 golden to build it, and then you got nothing out of it. In fact, you got bad health because it has a -1 effect on health. So there's no point of building it. And so now, since the taxation bonus has no effect, I replace in some places the taxation bonus with a trade bonus. Now, of course, you also trade tobacco, so you make money and you make VAT from, you can tax the sales of tobacco. And these trade bonuses, they're in a sense the income from trade for the state's treasury. And so when you get a trade bonus, actually it's taxation bonus. It's a taxation that works rather than taxation that doesn't. Yeah. And so I replaced the taxation bonus with a trade bonus, for example, for tobacco. And it's still increased taxation, basically, that's what it is. But taxation on trade as opposed to taxation on having the fields or something like that. Okay, that is a change of the buildings. I don't think it changed anything else in the buildings. I think that was just to remove the taxation bonus and replace it with trade bonus. Then export character traits. There were some traits that were not being triggered. There were also ancillaries that were not being triggered. And so I've made a few changes there to trigger the character traits and ancillaries. There were also the same thing for the guilds, expert described guilds. Some guilds were not being triggered. For example, the Alchemist Guild was being triggered by recruiting musketeers, but the in-game name for musketeers was Musketeere in German. And Musketeere would not trigger the guild. So recruiting musketeers in the game would not trigger the guild. It would all be triggered in the base game by musketeers in the medieval 2, context, those musketeers. Yeah. And so some of these triggers wouldn't work anymore. And they weren't, someone hadn't noticed. So I changed some of those triggers. It's still, the Alchemist Guild is still not being triggered by musketeers because I thought that you could get Alchemist Guilds everywhere. But it's being triggered by various other units that have firearms, and especially by artillery. If you recruit artillery pieces, cannons, mortars, or if you build buildings. A lot of that was there already. It's just I removed some of the stuff that was made no sense, like the musketeers, because you don't get musketeers, things like that. And then I added a couple, like if you recruit a bodyguard unit, that will give now a bonus both to, or with a small bonus that would tend to trigger the Alchemist Guild or the Swordsmith's Guild, as a, so because otherwise these two guilds weren't being triggered very much, almost never, at least not in the early part of the campaign. And then the last one was the expert described unit. I've only made two very small changes in that. The early cuirassiers and the early rubble had a circular formation, and I changed those into a square formation. I thought their circular formations look stupid and they're difficult to use, and there's no reason why they should have circular formation when everything else has a square formation, including the arquebusiers and all kinds of other units. So everybody gets now a square formation except for the religious fanatics. They are the only unit that still get a circular formation in the latest version of Invita 2. So let's move on to the next thing I want to discuss, and that is, if you see here on the top, the first folder is the text folder. So this folder contains the English text that you see in the events, in the units, in the construction queues, in the buildings, and all those things, including the quotes. Even some of the quotes were in German that had not been translated into English. Some of the events and many other things were still in German, had not been translated into English. And some of the translations were not terribly good. So these files change all of that. And here's an example of how the text looked before. In one of these cases, the drainage. So it says the German itself likes to eat bread. Now in German country is bread made square from grains such as rye and wheat, from barley. One does rather the strengthening of German beer. Yeah, there's something there you gather about grains and German beer, but it's very obscure. So at the time when this translation took place, it was done in a real push. Google Translate had just come into existence, but it was extremely crude. And so if you tried to get Google Translate, you got some gibberish out of it. even with main languages like German and French and so on, it was gibberish what you got out of it. You could, some of the words were correct, but it was difficult to understand what was going on. And so that had to be at some point supervised and corrected and done carefully. There was really a lot of text. If you put all the text together, I expect it will fill up a book. There's a lot of German text, and they had to be translated. Mogundiakum, also known as Monty, who was one of the prime inspirations and key leaders, I suppose, one of the two leaders in the mod, along with Gingantus, came up with the idea to someone could translate it. I couldn't do it at the moment at that time. I was extremely busy with work on the Broken Crescent. And so Monty took it up. He did what he could. But you can see that that wasn't always as good as it could have been. So I've made changes. You can read it on the right. And I've made these changes in my Invita, original Invita submod, and there was still, I kept finding texts that I had missed. And so I've made new changes such as this one. And now and then I find some things still, but nothing major. I think now everything's kind of readable. I may just do a couple more quick patches, or if I find any other text that desperately needs to be retranslated or improved. Okay, and so then we have here in those files that I showed you, the text files, we have the new quotes by Robert Monroe. And here are some of the quotes that come up during the transition screens. Very interesting, very pithy quotes about the situation, what he faced, what he encountered, how he thought, how he reflected on the events of the war as he goes on describing his expedition with the regiment of Scots. And then, in addition to these files you will find in text, the same files you could be found in text DEN. Text DE only has some of the names. Like I said, there was some vacant, empty names for some of the characters. These have been fixed in a couple of other issues with some spelling errors or something wasn't working. So I corrected those. And so this is what those text.d and text.en files do. The UI is the subfolder that has all the images that you see in the game, all the various thumbnails, all the images, various thumbnails that you see. They're in there. And if you open it up, and this doesn't really have portraits, the exception of one portrait. It doesn't have portraits here. The portraits are in the second part of the Invita 2 submod that will be released, or should have been already released by now as a separate download. What we have here is these 4 folders. The first one at the top is the ancillaries. This is the images for the ancillaries. For example, here are, you see, academic scholar, academic student, accomplished, animals, horse, biographer. A lot of these are new that you can see maybe from the dates. Almost all of them are new. Yeah, these are new ones that are from the period of the 30 Years' War. For example, here's the image for the inventor ancillary. It's one of these here, near the bottom, inventor. It has this image. So when you get an inventor as an ancillary for one of your generals, I'll maybe explain a tutorial how you get the ancillaries, what to do to get them. But once you get one, it will have this image of Otto von Guericke, who was a scientist. He was became the mayor of Magdeburg, and was responsible for the reconstruction of Magdeburg after the war. So he lived around the time, although he was primarily active after the war. And he was a groundbreaking scientist. He collected a lot of what was going on in different parts of Europe in terms of scientific discoveries and what had been discovered in the past since antiquity, for example, magnetism, other things that have been observed over centuries, sometimes forgotten. And he collected all those in a series of books that he wrote, which was very similar in spirit to the later books under Newton, the Principia or Principia Mathematica. So he wrote a similar set of books, but several decades before Newton. And he also made several inventions himself. A whole lot of many different inventions. So it was the perfect example for an inventor. This was a beautiful portrait I found for him. Of course, as an auxiliary, this portrait would be tiny, 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 just a few pixels across. But yeah. So there are other ancillaries, other portraits for other types of ancillaries that your characters can get. Okay, so that was the ancillaries. Then the second file in this list in the UI folder is the custom portraits. Now here, I only changed one of the custom portraits. One of the sons of Frederick V of the Roman Palatinate. The youngest son at the time had his portrait, Simon. I forget the name of his youngest son. At the time when the war broke out, he was very young. Maybe 10, 12 years old or something like that, thereabouts, maybe a little bit older, I'm not sure. But when the modding team searched for one of his portraits, they couldn't find one. They found one when he was 8 years old. And so they used the 8-year-old portrait for this general who's going to look like 8 years old even when he's 30, let's say, or 38. Or whatever he was, 40, whatever he was, near the end of the war. So searched again, and I was lucky to find a portrait that was from his late teens, when he was about 16, 17, much more appropriate. And so I used that portrait and replaced the 8-year-old portrait with a 15, 16-year-old portrait. And that's what that is. Nothing else. So these are all like small fixes. There's nothing that changes how the game plays out. That's the custom portrait. We have the Northern European folder that has buildings inside, and some of these buildings, some of them were buggy. Some of the icons that were buggy. For example, if you look at the what's called the trade fair, what is a fair? The trade fair thing. Which has been constructed on the right, and visibly right at the bottom on the right. When that is not being constructed, it looks like that. When you click on it and you put in the construction queue, then you get some weird, makes no sense, some lines and some nothing visible or something weird. That was buggy. So I fixed that so you actually see the same image that you would have seen before construction. When you put it in construction queue, you still get the same image. And so there were 2 or 3 such problems, which I fixed. One of them had to do with the artillery, the cannon foundry, I think. But then I decided to change the cannon foundry image altogether. Because before it was, I think I explained that in my previous video. Before that, it was a landscape painting that presumably showed some cannon foundry, but it wasn't clear where the cannon foundry was. It was probably a red building in a corner right at the bottom. It was a landscape painting. But in any case, so now we have a cannon being portrayed in the cannon foundry. And for the highest level artillery foundry, the artillery arsenal, you get, for this one, you get to upgrade your ship's cannon +3. And so, yeah, the biggest cannons at that time were the culverins, demi-culverins, and cannon. Cannon was the name of a type of cannon. And it was one of the biggest cannons, the cannon. And they were artillery, mostly used for artillery and sieges. They weren't used for field battles. And so artillery arsenal, I put a ship there to show that you can build ship cannons, for example, a demi-culverin. That's the only one you can build, actually. You cannot build culverin or proper cannon in the mod. Okay, so that changed also some of the visuals there. And then, so that was a Northern European file, that's what it has. And then the Southern European file has inside portraits. But as I said, I put the portraits in a different download. The only thing you get here is you get the priests. So in order to correct a crash that happens, you need to have a folder called priests under the, which you see here, under young. If you don't have this folder called priests, then the game can very often, especially in late game, suffer portrait-related crashes, which are extremely annoying and can be quite frequent. Simply by adding this folder called priests, even though it's not really strictly speaking being used, just having it avoids these late game portrait-related crashes. So this folder will not really be used, depending how you mod the game, but it will not really be used in the way the game is modded. But for some reason, it is necessary to have it there. If you don't have it, crashes happen. Okay, and so these are all the changes in the first set of files that is called Invita 2 General. Yeah, the first download. The second download is the portrait download, and the portrait download has portraits for all the various characters of the game. Now, having increased the number of portraits, at some point we ran out of how many portraits were being painted, how have been painted, have existed. There are already hundreds of portraits, nearly 1,000 from this period. They're all portraits from the period. Only thing that I changed in this mod is that I added a few portraits that I found that were very nice, such as this one by Rembrandt, to replace some portraits that I did not like so much that I had. For example, there were some Catholic portraits that were not very nice. I found a couple that were actually very, very nice. This looks like Cardinal Richelieu, but it's not. It's another cardinal, if I am not mistaken. Another French cardinal from the period. It looks very much like Richelieu, but it's not him. And then for the Rogues, I found a few portraits that I quite liked. For example, this one here is a Huguenot. Now, Huguenots, I think, were wiped out by the French. It was a sect, a Christian sect of the time. No one will complain that I put one of the characters, one of the Huguenots, as a rogue, as a potential assassin or spy, since there are no Huguenots left alive. And here's another portrait that I found very nice from the period, which I used for the spies and assassins. The spies and assassins have portraits either of artists or musicians, actors, or self-portraits of painters. The majority are in these categories, I think. And they're pretty much all the portraits I've used are historical. Only a couple that were AI generated. By chance, it generated a couple of very successful ones, a couple of merchants. This is what it has. This second file, the one called portraits, has portraits. It has the same number as before, but some of them have been updated. If it's just that, you may say, okay, I'll skip that. But it has a couple more things that you may want to download it. It's not just that it has some new portraits. If you see the first file called Captain Banners, this file has inside it portraits for the captains and admirals as they appear on the strat map. If you click on the strat map character, as there's those people that are moving around, like there's a ship, for example. If you click on the ship, you get the portrait of the admiral who's in the ship. And if you click on a unit that doesn't have a general, then you get the portrait of a captain, which is a generic portrait. So these are defined here in this file. And it so turned out that some of the admirals, Mainz was an example, and I can't remember the other one, maybe Bayreuth, or I can't remember what other faction. There were two factions that had been assigned portraits, one from the Moors and the other one from Egypt. There were originally it was the faction was called Egypt, and it was modded to become Mainz. But the admiral had not been changed, the admiral portrait. So if you click on the ship, you had a Saracen admiral with a turban. So as the admiral of the ship of your fleet or whatever. So that was a bit weird. And there was another faction that had the one was originally Moors, and I think was another one was Timurids maybe, and they had some Saracen, some weird non-Western portraits. And so these have been changed. And also there were some portraits where the admirals had chainmail. There was no chainmail in this period, so I changed those. And so they all have now plate armor. And they all look, wearing plate armor, and they look like from this period. Okay. For example, here's the standard look for a lot of the captains, and especially the admirals. They look like him. They're no longer Saracen admirals or Saracen portraits. And sometimes they're custom-made portraits, like this is one. These were made by either Gigantus or Monty. So some of them have this custom-made portraits, and some of them have this more generic portrait of the plate armor. Okay, so that is what's in the Captain banners. So in the Northern European folder, there the only thing that you'll find there is new buildings. Now I've gone through over this already. These new icons that I've added. So I put this in both mods because some of them were buggy. So even if you download only one or only the other, you get those. You also get with both modes the priests, and the priests are in the next folder, the Southern European. This has the priests. You can see them here. One of these files is the priests. So whichever one you download, you get the priests, and you get the fix for the buggy icons for the buildings. But in addition, you get here all kinds of other images or portraits for the other types of characters. For example, here are the portraits for the civilians, so the diplomats. Not all of them. There are about half of them. There are another half as many, about 90, I think, in total, or close to 100. But this is what they look like. And also try to normalize the contrast and color and general appearance, so they all look as uniform as possible in terms of color, contrast, they're all from the period. They're all actual paintings of actual people from this period. The diplomats were named, very often named characters. We know who they were. The first one is the Prince of Nassau, the Dutch head of state. The third one is Gustavus Adolphus, and the other ones are similar. I think one of these is Frederick V in two places, repeated twice. Frederick V of the Roman Palatinate, and there are some others, the Spanish king, I think is one at the bottom on the left, and various others. These are all noblemen. Maybe that's Pinhol, I'm not sure, but it's a high-ranking Spanish character at the bottom on the left. And so these are the diplomats. Most of them were known who they were, and there were various, dukes, princes, electors, and high-ranking officials that we had portraits of. And so I turned them into diplomats. And in addition to those, then there are other ordinary gentlemen whose names have been lost to history. We no longer know their names. They are known as gentlemen. So I have portraits of a gentleman. And the first one is, as said, by Rembrandt. There are also there's some other ones who are very well known painters who made these other paintings. But they are just ordinary gentleman who had enough money to commission an artist to paint a portrait. Descartes is near the top, the sixth from the left. And so these are the portraits of the merchants. And then the rocks, as I said, were various characters, mostly artists, actors, musicians, and the like. And that concludes Invita 2. The idea we made in Invita 2 is so we don't have to update the whole mod and release like a higher version of 1648. Since it was likely I would be the only one still working on it, making some upgrades that I put them in Invita 2. But you could say that it's basically the same as the base game. It's just an extension of it. It doesn't change how the base game works, except for, the AI changes it a little bit. And some of the triggers, now some guilds are being triggered more often. And so some traits, some ancillaries may be triggered that weren't being triggered before. And so, there are some small changes, but nothing groundbreaking. The game stays the same. Visually, I hope there has been various improvements and some fixes. There are some fixes for some very small bugs, not very consequential, but annoying bugs like names being vacant, missing, or the portraits of the admirals and various things like that, or the ancillaries being medieval, previously there, now from this period. Okay, and so that's all the changes. Now conclude with just a few screenshots from the game, just to give an impression of what it looks like with the star fort. I may do a separate video to explain the formations. Like here's the Swedish formation. I may make a tutorial to explain what units do you need in your army in order to get it to automatically deploy in this, let's say, the Swedish formation. Yeah, so suddenly you click battle and you see your army deployed in this wonderful way that imitates the way the Swedish army would deploy for battle. And so I'll do a separate tutorial, give you some guidelines, what sort of mix of units you should have in your armies, so you get deployments like this one. And that was the end of my explanation for the new submod Invita 2, the update of the original Invita submod. I will also put a link in the Total War Center, and there will be a link to the downloads in the description below the video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.